Hello, and welcome to a very special episode of the Last Edit podcast. I'm Citizen Sleeve, this is my wonderful friend,
Silver Hawkins.
and for those of you who don't know, this is a weekly film podcast where Silver and I swap and alternate different films that we want to discuss weekly, and also TV series, and we do some specials. And this week, we're doing a special. Now, we've done over 30 podcasts now, at least one a week, a few sometimes, and we've been doing it for about 10 months. And it occurred to Silver the other day that maybe just maybe after 10 months, we should tell you a little bit about ourselves. Who we are, why we do this kind of stuff, why we enjoy movies so much, why we choose so many obscure movies perhaps as well. So I thought it'd be a really cool podcast to do. We'll just talk about ourselves and our past and the stuff we like and the kind of stuff that got us completely in love with film. And yeah, it's going to be a cool time, I think. So I've started, so I'm going to throw to you straight away. I kind of want to know just, first of all, those first few films in your life, however young you were, however old you were, um, that really mesmerized you and got you into cinema.
I think maybe the first I remember when I was very young might have been E.T. Um, E.T. and Ghostbusters, I think, were like two of the big ones. Like I remember as a little kid, like I could never watch like the librarian scene in the early Ghostbusters. Like I had to like close my eyes or have my eyes covered during that scene or look away. Um, that like my mother would I think would insist on that early on, and yeah, E.T. obviously made like an enormous impression. I remember I found like the early cornfield scene like pretty scary when I was a kid. Like when Elliot first meets E.T., I find him with the M&Ms or the Skittles or whatever it is he uses.
Yeah, the Skittles.
Yeah, like those are the two movies that like immediately come to mind. And as I got a little older, because like every holiday season here, they would run there were a couple of movies that would run like pretty regularly. I think Star Wars: A New Hope was one, and India Raiders of the Lost Ark was really the sort of the big one, like that kind of blew me away in terms of the action and the plot and yeah, like Raiders was might have been like the first film that really got its hooks into me.
Uh, there's some similarities there. I mean, I'm not dissimilar in age to you, a little bit older, but Ghostbusters was a huge one as well. Absolutely massive. Obsessive. Had the toys. Used to play
Yeah,
with Egon Spengler and all that stuff. And yeah, the library scene. When I was that age, it was the library scene. It was Slimer. It was the ghosts and the
yeah,
proton packs. It was all the visual
yeah,
cool stuff. And then as
and
I got
of
older,
course the rockin' music song.
the rocking music. Oh,
Yeah,
the soundtrack.
yeah.
Yeah, it was. Oh, that was a joy.
Who you
I
gonna
think.
call? Yeah.
Yeah, I think my very first film memory. Is it though? I think it's probably Black Cauldron, Disney. I think that's one of my earliest memories anyway, because I
Right.
remember it being a bit scarier than the stuff I'd seen before.
Yeah.
And I really liked that because it was a bit more challenging than the stuff I'd seen prior to that. In fact, Dumbo actually is another one. Dumbo and
Yeah.
Robin Hood. Dumbo and Robin Hood were the two Disney films that played constantly. They were always on TV. They was at holidays, like you said. So those two I really got into. I think yeah, a bit after that it was E.T. was obviously huge and on the radar. Star Wars, Indy, like he was always on the TV and on holidays, and Raiders was a joy. Bond was a big one for me because Bond. I was kind of indoctrinated very young into watching Bond because
Yeah.
it was Bond, and of course then every Christmas, every Easter, every holiday, a Bond would be on, and so it got to the
Yes.
point where I must have only been 10 or 11, but I probably had seen like Live and Let Die. I don't. Oh God, how many times? Or even the original Doctor No, just so many times. I think just trying to think the film that really because one film kind of changed me and brought me into horror hard, and I was way too young. We had new neighbours that moved in next door to us when I was a kid. I think I was 7 or 8, somewhere around there. And we went over there, my brother and I, and he's 2.5 years younger than me, so even younger. And there was a film playing on the TV, and all I saw was a decapitated head in a fridge, and the door opened,
Yeah.
slammed shut, and it was from a horror comedy called House. I found out later, and I ran out of that house into my own house screaming. But that moment onward, like that was it. I horror nut. So and then I started watching. My dad was brilliant when I was a kid because he knew how much I was. He could see how much I was getting into cinema,
Yeah.
and and quite obsessively, not just oh it's a film, whatever. I was really getting.
It's not
into
just
it.
a fad. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what he started doing was really cool. First of all, it was things like he'd stay up with me and we watch Hammer horror films.
Yeah.
And it was perfect time because they'd been out for a long time, all the big famous ones, and they were constantly on TV. And then now and again, as I got to like, I was like 13 or 14, he'd actually sit with me and I watched the Godfather Trilogy for the first time with him. I think one of my abiding memories is watching the Godfather, the first Godfather, um, and the second, but in the chronological order they were kind of shot in. It was played on TV in that way with my dad. And I think that was the moment that, like, I loved film prior to that, but seeing Godfather for the first time, and at that age being patient enough to watch it and not get bored by its pace, I think that's when I was like, ding, it just kind of
Yeah.
illuminated my concept of what cinema could be. So
Yeah.
that was really kind of a touching point for me, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I didn't really get like uniquely caught up in film. Film was just sort of another like creative outlet that I took an interest in. Like really growing up, I think my main like creative outlet was books. Like those were kind of my main pursuit and remained it for most of my adolescence as well. But we did have like I was raised by my mother and my aunt. I was raised basically by women, and we would watch movies a lot together, like as a kind of family ritual thing, which was really enjoyable. It's just like a social thing, just coming together and watching a movie. I think that was probably sort of the main way I experienced movies back then, was just in that social setting. And that experience, communal experience, a bit similar to going to a movie theater, but a little more intimate
And more comfortable, usually, anyway. No, that's great. I mean, I think when you sit your family and watch a film. I mean, I remember when I first watched Monty Python's Holy Grail, and I was way too young to understand any of the high level stuff it was talking, the politics, the class system, all these things. And I think it was my dad, my brother and I. My brother and I have quite similar, like we like a lot of similar films. Our favorite film is the same, stuff like that. But I just remember watching the oh god, the Knights of Ni,
Yeah.
and they want the and the Black Knight. I just moments in that film, and again I was probably 7 or 8, maybe 9, something like that. Again, that kind of age, and it broke us. I can't I can't remember prior, because I was so young, any time I'd laughed harder in my life before at the Black Knight. He's got an arm off. Oh my god! My brother and I broke. So that was really cool as well. And then you get that whole communal thing. You're all laughing together and experience it together.
Yeah.
So did bits of that. I remember my mum, not so much my dad. In fact, the only film I ever saw in the cinema with my dad was Jurassic Park when it came out. I remember it vividly because my mum and dad both came. Graham and I, and the queue was, even now as a kid, it seemed like the biggest queue I'd ever seen for a film in my life.
Yeah.
Around a corner and around another corner. So that was really cool. But my mum was really great at taking us to the cinema.
Yeah, mine too.
So, and that was amazing. So my auntie Sandra and my mum used to take all my cousins and myself and Graham all to the cinema at once. It must have been a mission and a half, because there must have been like 7 of us.
Yeah.
And we'd go and see things like, I remember seeing Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. I remember seeing Gremlins 2, the new batch. I remember seeing Batman Returns on my birthday. That was a bit later. And then, yeah, I just loved going and seeing films of that ilk with my mum and the kids and stuff, because you get into it more and you enjoyed it. And most of the stuff we watched were like big action adventure films.
Yeah.
Although I remember one birthday I watched Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. That was a great birthday. So yeah, that was the kind of
Yeah.
cool stuff. So I really enjoyed that stuff.
Yeah, I remember once when I was like, I must have been 11 or 12 or something, and one of my friends from school had managed to somehow procure like an early before I think it was before it was out. It's supposed to be out really, but an early VHS copy of Terminator 2 um,
Cool.
that we were able to actually watch, which was absolutely amazing. Um, but yeah, I remember coming home and I told my mom, "Yeah, I just watched like Terminator 2." Like,
She's like, "Oh my god!"
no, I mean she didn't freak out, but yeah, she did like turn and say, "My son just watched Terminator 2." Yeah.
He's all grown up now. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Oh, I love those times. Like I remember, I think I got to about 13 or 14, and by that point, I was quite obsessively taping films off television. So I was taping all the popular stuff, obviously, but I was starting to tape things that were very unusual, I guess, for that age. And my mum and dad, that they were pretty cool with it, 14, 15. They knew the kind of stuff I was watching and getting into, and the horror and stuff. But I think they realised that it's not like I was acting out, or it was changing the way I was, being or perceiving stuff, anything like that. But I started catching things like Videodrome, and that completely changed. And then I started getting into Cronenberg, and then I started getting into like Blue Velvet came along. In fact, prior to that, I remember when I first started. So I should say my whole educational background is basically in film to some extent. So in the UK, we have something called A levels. So you do your GCSEs, which is all the subjects, your history, maths,
Yeah.
sciences, all the rest of it. And then between 16 and 18, generally, you do 2 years where you choose 3 or 4 subjects that are very specific and are just at a bit higher level. And I was really lucky. So I did English language, English literature, makes pretty obvious sense, I guess. And then I also did film studies. And film studies, it was the first year film studies wasn't A level anywhere in the UK. So it was brand new. So no one had ever seen it before. And it like kind of popped up. And I was like, wow, it's like exactly what I want to study.
Yeah.
And like one of the very first films we studied was Eraserhead. Wow, for a 16-year-old to, I mean, I remember taking, it was like that, and I think we studied Psycho, a few, Carpenter was the auteur we studied, so we started with Dark Star, his first film, and all mad, I mean, Dark Star's batshit crazy as a film. Space beach balls, people surfing, but Eraserhead was the one that challenged me like no other film I'd seen before at that age.
Yeah.
Because it's so. I mean, Lynch is a master at weaving unease and oddness into weird and difficult situations. And I remember writing down in my notes like those who don't know, it's about a father who keeps having these dreams about having a deformed baby, and the baby is born and very deformed. And this is based on Lynch's own worry that his son was going to be born with a club foot at the time, and that kind of seeped into the film. But it's so avant-garde, discontinuous, and abstract compared to standard Hollywood films. There's a bit in it where every now and again it'll cut to a bearded lady sat next to a radiator. And my film notes are just like, in the lighting and the contrast. There's a bearded lady in front of a white radiator. I don't know. And then this was like 4 or 5 times. I was like, what the hell? But I remember that being that little period at the start of film studies was when my eyes got open to a lot more than I'd been able to experience on TV or renting from the video stores and stuff like that.
Yeah. I think part of I think I got a bit of a distance towards film as I kind of got into my teens and like my adolescence. I think partially because I became like politically aware, and I sort of started retaining a deep skepticism towards like Hollywood and like mainstream film production in general, or just mainstream production like in general. I became like my early teens. I became a pretty hardline communist. like anti-imperialist. And eventually, I sort of grew out of that with the realization that like hierarchy is like fundamental to human nature, and there's always going to be like people asserting themselves over others to some extent, and I sort of mellowed a bit, and I started gravitating more towards internationalism and globalism, and like international cooperation and solidarity, uh, and from there I sort of reconnected with films that at least that kind of tapped into that sort of empathetic experience, like that allows you to sort of experience different other facets of humanity, as it were, because I found that film was a really effective way of doing that. Much like, much like literature, where it exposes you to different points of view, and different perspectives, and helps you broaden your horizon. And it also,
Yeah.
as I grew older, I started gravitating more towards documentaries as well, which I obviously had not so much as a younger man and or boy and teenager. So I really started getting into documentaries as well. Like Errol Morris, for instance, I think one of the great documentarians. Like a movie like Fog of War, which is basically his interview with Robert McNamara, and I don't remember how many lessons. I think it's like 11 lessons from Robert McNamara. And at the time of the interview, I think Robert McNamara was like 90. Robert McNamara, of course, is the former Defense Secretary of the United States. He was Defense Secretary during the Vietnam War, and he was like around 90 or so, and he was like completely clear-headed. Like it was just a remarkable interview. Like or hate Robert McNamara, but that interview was really illuminating. Like there's a segment in the film where he talks about, because McNamara served in World War II as an American bomber. He dropped bombs on Japan, and he talks about like the firebombing of Tokyo, and he says that if we had lost the war, we would have been tried as war criminals, which is a fairly sobering moment from
Yeah, very.
from like an American official in that high a position. And I mean that movie came out around the time of the Iraq War as well, so that sort of tapped into that whole debate as well. And those were all of those were facets that kind of like informed me and helped me grow as a human being, where film was a major part of that and became a major part.
So it didn't really happen documentary wise for me until uni. So doing A level film was strictly film. So I guess my worldview opened up in A levels when we started looking at French Nouvelle Vague and Italian neorealist cinema. Because
Yeah,
I'd watched foreign films before, but I'd never studied a movement. And of course, the French Nouvelle Vague movement, French New Wave, is one of the most, if not the most important film movements in film history because of what it went on to do and what it went on to push. Um, Influencing the 60s and 70s directors in Hollywood, while also being influenced by directors like Hitchcock and David Lean, and yet taking those techniques and inventing new ways to use them. Cahiers du Cinéma was exciting for me to start reading the English version of at the time because you have these Eric Romer and these great Truffaut. Obviously, you have these great directors who wrote for the magazine Godot, who would later then go on and establish this film movement. So that helped a lot. But Italian neorealist cinema was a very really interesting one for me because it was looking at poverty. I mean, that's what really Italian neorealist cinema is about because of the time it was set. It was, you know, really bad mix and matched film roles because the country had been destroyed in the
yeah,
war. Um, the most of the population was disastrously poor, and so films like Bicycle Thieves and Shoe Shine and La Terra Trema really shook my mind in terms of a worldview
Yeah.
starting to appreciate, people and what they went through a lot more. And by that point, I'd also watched Blade Runner, so my mind had really opened up to different concepts and ideologies and the way you can interpret that cinematically.
Yeah.
But yeah, uni was the time that I really. So I studied TV and film at uni. So we had this big documentary section. Um, and I studied all the classics, Nanook of the North, The Grease and stuff, Night Mail, all of the original documentaries. I even teach Nanook of the North now as one of the originators. But it wasn't really until and it wasn't part of that unit we did. It wasn't until I got to do Holocaust on cinema that we watched a documentary by a guy called Claude Lanzmann in 1985 called Shoah. And Shoah just means truth in Jewish.
Yeah, and it's like their word for the Holocaust.
Yeah, exactly. The truth of what really happened and what
Yeah.
it was. And it's really just a series of interviews with survivors then, and some SS officers and German officers. And really, really hauntingly, beautifully shot shots of Treblinka and Auschwitz and all the different death camps, and the horror. Like I remember there's one section in the opening salvo that's 2-3 hours long, where one of the survivors is talking about going to Treblinka on the train for the first time. And I remember Landsman using this amazing tracking shot of just literally moving the camera across the tracks,
Yeah.
forward, and it's really haunting. But it's so beautifully paced, and that's one that really really got me. But then diametrically opposed to that, I also had to watch Andy Warhol's Empire, which is 7 hours of one shot of the Empire State Building's top, where one bird lands and then it flies away. So, so I've watched a lot of different documentaries, and yeah, documentaries are really essential for establishing truth often, establishing better worldview, and just understanding culture and cultural differences and the way the world works. Maybe even more so than film does, because it provides a greater sense of truth, I think. So yeah,
Yeah.
documentary's been pretty important in my life, and I've only watched more and more and more of it. It's become more available, more prevalent as a medium.
Yeah, I mean it's just yeah. I mean it's just the film medium itself is so effective because it is it has that visual side to it, like the shot along the tracks that you described in the Shoah that is so evocative. Like, which is different from just like reading it in a textbook or whatever.
Yeah,
and sort of
very much.
puts you there. Not to mention like just watching like archival footage or like from mass graves or the like. Yeah, it's really effective, the tools that you can use in film, for better or worse. I mean, like the Nazis use Leni Riefenstahl learned to use
Yep.
it for certain purposes, certainly.
Yeah.
Very effectively.
Very effectively. Triumph of the Will is the best piece of propaganda ever put to cinema. I mean,
Yeah, certainly
it's
one of them.
it's horrifying.
Along with some of the Soviet films, yeah, like Eisenstein, as well. So yeah, it's like, I mean, I don't know that, but that's why film is so complicated, because it allows for all these different genres to sort of coalesce. Like, we even have like blends of fiction and documentaries, and like a movie like Waltz with Bashir, right? Which we've talked about, which sort of is an animated documentary that sort of follows a narrative structure, and yet it is like in a lot of ways a traditional documentary with talking heads and witnesses accounts and stuff.
Yeah, it follows elements of news conventions, and that's what you often will see with those types of documentaries.
Yeah.
What would you say are moments in cinema? Like, was there a year, for instance, where films just were so stunning and amazing that they kind of washed over you? I remember my second year of uni. It was 98. And that 98, 99 period, I still believe is one of the last big golden eras in cinema, because you had things like Lord of the Rings just on the horizon, but in those years, The Matrix came out, American Beauty came out, um, Human Traffic came out. You know, this host of just stunning films, and I was studying film at the time, so I felt like, wow, you know, we had a great cinema, and we'd often go and see stuff. I remember going to see Titanic with a few friends, and it's like 3.5 hours long, and like the toilet break in the middle, the whole cinema just got up and went, oh, that was brilliant. And I had a great time with the re-release of The Exorcist. I think I told you one of my friends, a bunch of friends came, and one of my friends was Catholic and had never seen The Exorcist before. Now I'd seen it tons of times by then, and it was almost a comedy, because when you watch
Yeah.
it with other people now, it's quite difficult to pretend it's particularly serious when Reagan's spinning her head round or doing the spider walk and stuff. So most people are laughing. He was mortified, especially the very famous crucifix scene where Reagan is stabbing herself in her naughty bits, shall we say? That he freaked out to that. The funniest I remember, I went to see Saving Private Ryan, and with all of my friends, and I think that was
I
98.
saw that with my maternal grandfather in the movies. In this
That'll be
movie theater.
interesting to talk about in a second. Then that's interesting. So went with all my mates, watched it all the way through, absolutely loved it. Walked out of the cinema, and do you know what I said? Because I, my friend, am so very dumb, and no one's let me forget this since 20 years on. I walked out and said, "Well, guys, that's the best goddamn Vietnam War movie I've ever seen." I don't know why. It entered my mind. And for 20 odd years, all I get is that now. Anytime Saving Private Ryan comes up. Hey, man, you seen that great Vietnam movie? Hey, hey? You absolute bastard. So, yeah, I've had some great time at the cinema. Had some crap times as well. Had some crap times as well. I remember one of the worst was I went to see Watchmen. And the movie didn't start in time with the sound. Then the film stopped. Then they started playing the sound again with no visuals. Then we waited like 10 minutes and we're like, "Oh, what the hell's going on here?" And then they started it again. And then there was some issue with the audio this time. So we were getting the screen, the visuals, but we weren't getting the proper audio. So then they restarted. It was like 3 attempts to restart it. And I'm not saying that soured me on the film, but I didn't like the film either. It was disjointed. I didn't like the way they'd shot it. I'd read the comics at that point as well. So that was one of the more naff experiences I've had at the cinema.
Probably the worst I've had was probably I went to see Hayao Miyazaki's ostensibly his last film, The Wind Rises, in a local theater, and because it's an animated movie, someone had brought like their toddler, and The Wind Rises is not a film for children. It is.
No, bad move.
It's a really slow-paced, sort of, kind of biographical film about Miyazaki. It's basically allegorical biography, an allegorical biography, and it's about an aircraft engineer who basically just wants to build an airplane, but of course he gets contracted by the Japanese military to build the Zero fighter plane, and like, because the toddler just couldn't keep up with the movie, he just started like running up and down the hallways and stuff, like in the theater. He couldn't sit still. And yeah, that did not make for a great watching experience of the movie, unfortunately.
Yeah, I bet. Last thing you want is kids, especially a film that, like, the parents should really have done a little bit of research. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's not a Disney film. There's no happy-go-lucky theme tunes and dancing bears or whatever the hell going on in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really been to the cinema. I guess as you get older, and the fact that now it's much easier to watch stuff. Whether
It's also much more
streaming or-
expensive to go to the cinema now.
It
than
is,
it
yeah,
used to be.
a lot more.
Like
Yeah, a
here,
lot
here it's like $20 almost for a ticket.
Yeah, it's probably about £12 or £13 for the ticket, and then obviously if you want condiments and all that stuff as well. And
Yeah.
I'm 6'5", and I still find now I can't fit very well. Especially, I don't mind if it's not a packed cinema. Then it's not too bad because there's a bit more space. But as soon as the cinema's packed, and I've been in some rare. I mean, I remember seeing Scream when it first came out.
Yeah.
That has to be one of the best. Oh, that and the first Austin Powers have to be two of my most favorite fun cinema experiences I've ever had. Austin Powers was just a giant room full of people who could not stop laughing. They just couldn't. And then Scream, oh man, the opening death, Drew Barrymore's character. Wow, when the titles came up, everyone was like, "Oh!" screaming, and I haven't had that a lot anymore. Like it used to be quite vocal some cinemas and some films. But I just don't experience that a great deal anymore. Maybe I don't go as much, and
I remember the first time I actually got to see A New Hope in the cinema, which was when the special editions came out in '97.
97, yeah.
And my mother took me in to see like or I went with my mother and my aunt to see all three movies. I think maybe we skipped Empire. I don't remember. But we certainly went to see A New Hope, and when that Star Destroyer comes in over the top of the shot, and like the entire movie theater is just rumbling from the surround sound. It's just amazing. Like that is, I think, probably the best opening shot in movie history. Is that opening shot of A New Hope at the start, Star Destroyer just coming in chasing
it's
the blockade
so
runner.
it's so iconic, isn't it? And the sound. I mean, I remember I've seen it at the cinema as well, and I think it was the same kind of time.
Yeah,
Obviously, we were much too young for when it first came out. But I was very lucky at uni. Um, the lecturer who was teaching me Holocaust on film, it's one of the most challenging but interesting units and studies of film I've ever watched because, as I told you, it's ranged from everything from Showa to films by Tinto Brass to obvious stuff like Schindler's List to almost everything in between, and some really, really difficult stuff as well. But one of the cool advantages was I got to be the person who screened films in like our mini lecture hall cinema. So I do the reading list and stuff, but we also get to just put stuff on that we wanted. So obviously, there was a point at which it was just about when DVD had come out. It was just about becoming a thing.
yeah,
And I was going home and buying them one at a time and being selective because they were so expensive when they first came out, like 20, £30 or something. And I would take back these DVDs and slowly but surely, I remember seeing Blade Runner for the first time on a big screen. Wow, TVs weren't that big back then unless you could really afford the massive CRTs that were like a double-decker bus in your house.
yeah.
But here, 19 years old or whatever, I got the chance to watch with friends and other students all these cool films that we would have never been able to watch in the cinema otherwise. So that I really, really enjoyed that. That was great.
Also, I mean, one of the biggest ever was was a different Star Wars film, for better or worse. Phantom Menace,
Yeah.
in '99, which, I mean, the hype for that movie was just unbelievable. Like I remember, like I think I first came online. I first came on the internet like in '97, '98, right around there. Was when we got internet. And when the trailer came out for the Phantom Menace, I watched it like, I don't know, 12, 15 times or something. And I was there opening night at midnight, watching it, and like amazing experience. Just like the roar when Lucasfilm production logo came up, and the opening crawl began. Even though like it came with the whole like Trade Federation,
Trade
blockade,
Federation, policies, politicians, yeah.
yeah, and stuff like the roar that came with that, and just on from there, like even with the movie's issues, it was still an amazing experience, like communal experience to see that movie in that way. And even to this day, I mean, I was there at the midnight launch of both the other prequels as well, both Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. And as much as those movies have issues, I don't hate them as much as a lot of other like older Star Wars fans do. I think they're like mostly they're just fine. Like I think visually they're often, even with all the CGI, they're often fairly stunning to look at in terms of their worlds, like the world of Camino and stuff in Attack of the
Yeah, definitely.
Clones. Like the fight between Obi-Wan and Jango Fett in that movie. And and yeah, there's some stuff that works, some stuff that really doesn't work. But mostly I just enjoyed them as such, and I like they weren't movies that stayed with me. They were just like one and done kind of. But they
Yeah,
never like stayed with me in a bad way either.
yeah. It's not often I watch them now. But exactly the same as you. I think I watched them all in the cinema. I think I only watched Phantom Menace at midnight though, like the big because
Yeah,
it was such. I think people forget
that was a major cultural phenomenon.
just how big it was.
Yeah,
Like yeah, like all of a sudden every shop had Star Wars toys everywhere again, like it was when I was a kid, and
yeah.
I was 18 by then, 19, and yeah, same thing. I remember the roar when the film started, and Lucasfilm
Yeah.
the crawl started. Just the expectation, but then I also remember the weird walking home bit, of getting out of the cinema, and we were all still like, "Oh man, Star Wars! Oh wow, Star Wars is back! Wow, was that was that good Star Wars? Was that wow? Oh man, did you see the pod race? Did you see the Duel of Fates? Oh man, the music, Darth Maul. Oh, the flipping it. Was that a good Star Wars movie? I don't quite. So I know what you mean. The next few days was all of my friends were all kind of just discussing it, and
Yeah.
some were really still high, and some were like, I'm not quite sure about Jar Jar Binks, and that was a bit weird. But yeah, I actually prefer. I don't know. Attack of the Clones isn't bad. It's an okay sci-fi film. It's got some nice fight scenes. Dooku and Anakin at the start. General Grievous, I quite like, despite his
But that was
super.
Revenge Grievous.
Oh, of course, yeah, with Mr. Tuberculosis.
Attack of the Clones was Dooku and Yoda at the end as well. That was the big one everyone was
Oh, the
talking
big
about.
fight where Yoda looks like a small kangaroo who can't
Yeah,
stop. Like,
basically
yeah,
a bouncing
like
ball. Yeah,
yeah, exactly, bouncing around the screen like some major fool. So yeah, I like them. They are okay sci-fi films, a little bit better than okay sci-fi films. Yeah, they're really great to watch. They're really nice, pulpy, adventure-y films, but they don't stay in the mind very long, I don't think, compared to the trilogy that came before
no,
it,
yeah,
anyway.
certainly not for us. But I mean, they
Oh
they
yeah,
did make a huge impact on an earlier generation. I know that. Because I've spoken to a lot of the young people whose introduction to Star Wars was the prequels, and who love the prequels for part of that reason. And I think that's perfectly fine. And that's again with the new Star Wars films. I don't mind the fact that they're made. I don't mind. They're just not for me. They're just
yeah.
not for me.
They're still kind of for me, but no, I mean, as you said, a lot of these films they have a particular magic when you're a particular age,
Yeah,
and like Indy. I mean, I still adore Indy. It's but it's like the original Star Wars trilogy. It's so iconic to me. It's so
I
woven
actually,
into my fabric.
I actually that was another amazing experience. Like one of the biggest movie theaters here a couple of years ago, they had like a marathon. Indiana Jones, all four movies.
You left
Like
after
on
Last Crusade, I assume, yeah.
no, we did stay. I think it was all four. But I don't quite remember. I see that's the thing. I don't actually remember if the fourth movie was part of the marathon, but I imagine it was. But yeah, I went to see it with my probably my best friend, Lemon Streak. And that was just amazing. Like watching it on a huge, like one of the biggest screens in Northern Europe. Yeah, that was really stunning.
That's
Like
really
watching
really
watching
cool.
Raiders, watching Temple of Doom, watching Last Crusade. Yeah, like back
Oh
to
man,
back.
yeah. I'd love to see that. I saw a couple of them when I screened them at uni, but I've never seen them in a proper cinema. That'd be amazing. I think the biggest I ever, not the biggest. I think the best I ever went to is the Philharmonic in Liverpool, and we got to watch. It had just been released by the BFI, um, the original uncut version of Frankenstein,
Right.
and obviously huge horror fan, even back then, and to see that because the uncut, I think the cut version didn't have the scene with the little girl at the lake, or didn't have the full version, and there's a few other bits and pieces. So to see that on this, and it's like a really old theater, like a theater with just a giant screen with amazing acoustics.
Yeah.
And that was one of my, I think I was 16 or 17, and that was one of those really awesome moments where you take everything in. You take in the scenery, the feel of the theater, the audio and the ambience, and this wonderful film which I'd never really seen properly before. So that was amazing.
Yeah, there was another like major theater that had two other events that I went to also with Lemon Streak. One was for Some Like It Hot, which I think was in honor of the fact that I think the American Film Institute had named it the funniest comedy or the best comedy ever made.
Right.
So we went to see that. Really enjoyed it. Very funny movie. With a remarkable Marilyn Monroe in it. And we went to see Apocalypse Now Redux when it came out, which was, of course, the longer cut version of Apocalypse Now, which included like the Playboy Playmate scene and some other stuff. That was a movie that also really kind of captivated me. And it's sort of the whole like disharmony that's sort of current throughout. Like it's basically like an acid trip, the entire movie.
Oh yeah, yeah. And if anyone wants to know just how real that acid trip was, go and
Yeah.
watch Heart of Darkness, because that documentary, Coppola's wife shot it, and wow, it was just Vietnam. I mean, it wasn't like a film set. It wasn't like,
Yeah.
people were going mad. People couldn't deal with this. People were getting hurt. I mean, it was really difficult to shoot. I don't actually like Redux as a version.
No, yeah, we've talked about
Interestingly,
that.
yeah, it's just.
But I mean,
too much, I
that
think.
was the only movie. That was the only. Really, it's still, I think, the only version of Apocalypse Now I've actually seen is Redux.
Oh, interesting.
But of course, I think he made even like an extended version after
Yes,
Redux.
It's not called that, but it's something ridiculous like that. Yeah, with even more stuff in it.
Yeah.
It's not needed. But yeah, I went through a little period where, well, I studied westerns as a genre when I was doing my A levels, so I watched a lot of that, and then I started getting, and around that time I was getting into things like Full Metal Jacket, Apocalypse Now, Platoon, Born on the 4th of July. So I started watching a lot of those different films, and again, it's just one of those ways in which you can. I mean, war's a really difficult thing to show truthfully on screen, and filmmakers that get it right cut through the bone, because you have to.
Yeah.
Because these are terrifying, situations that people find themselves in, whether they've trained for it or not. And yeah, I remember watching. I think Platoon was a really obvious one, and that then led me on to Full Metal Jacket. And by that time, I hadn't really watched a lot of Kubrick, so I knew what 2001 was. We'd watched the opening scene in film studies class because it's iconic. It's got a graphic match and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But really, I hadn't watched anything else. Again, I knew of The Shining, but I hadn't really got to it yet. So once I got there and I saw Film Metal Jacket, and what a weirdly separated film it is. That whole opening half, Private Pile, the training camp, the jokes with Gunnery Sergeant Hartman, and the way that worked. And then this almost entirely different film after Pyle kills himself, that goes completely into the war. It's very, very weird. But a lot of these films, they show you things that you're never going to see anywhere else. And the stories that entwine around them drag you through them. Captain Willard and his whole journey in Apocalypse Now,
Yeah.
I find fascinating. Truly fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it's not really that there's growth. It's just the things that sort of happen along the way.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it's basically like a road movie, like a trippy road movie. Apocalypse Now.
Yeah, Lawrence Fishburne on the boat as they're traveling through. The narration is very cool
Yeah.
as well. And for those of you watching who haven't maybe read the book Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, it's quite depressing at times, but it's an amazing book, which is kind of what Apocalypse Now is based on. Man, we've talked about a lot. Cinema, what we liked in film, what gave us kind of a rebirth in film, maybe. It's weird and interesting that you should say that your worldview came from you kind of coming out of belief system and kind of loosening up and realizing different elements of the world. And mine was just kind of opening up through the study of film, and
Yeah.
mainly through movements more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I had a very early like political awakening, even when I was like 13 or 14, where, and I remember like my maternal grandfather, who was like a big union guy. He used to be, he had been like a merchant marine, and he was a ship's welder at one of the world's largest shipyards, which was here in Denmark, which had to close in the 80s because it couldn't compete with South Korea, with like the state subsidies that South Korean shipyards got. And he gave me like one of the most printed books in the world, which is Mao's Little Red Book, like
Right.
the little red book that Chairman Mao wrote, which made a profound impact on me. Not that I liked Mao, but there were still things written in that book that really sort of resonated, in terms of like solidarity and workers and labor power. And I really like the I read Karl Marx as well, and the like just the fundamental appeal of a society that had no class, no rich, no poor,
Yeah.
no human being has no value than the other. That really appealed to me on a fundamental level, and I consumed a lot of politics. I followed, like this was around the time also that of course there was a civil war in Yugoslavia in Europe,
Mm.
at the time, which was extremely bloody, and we had refugees come in from those countries, and we had news reports from those countries all the time that helped color our worldview as well, like politically, and really made me sort of skeptical towards like, yeah, globalism and like the global power elite, and like I was a pretty entrenched like European Union opponent at the time, and like anti-U.S. imperialist. Like I took part in a number of like U.S. anti-U.S. protests at the American embassy, like against various war efforts that the United States undertook, like bombing Iraq a couple of times. Yeah, and sort of as I grew older, I started to mellow a bit. I became much less hardline, and just sort of focused on the politics of solidarity, more than anything, of realizing that what we need is to come together as a world as broadly as we can, and sort of work towards that, and the forms that allow for that, which I recognized was one of the organizations that I used to hate, which was the European Union, and an organization like the United Nations, which for all its problems, I still believe is a fundamental necessity to global peace. And yeah, those like movies were a big part of sort of informing that, and and discovering that, I think.
It's quite interesting because my political awareness didn't started about the same age as yours, I guess. But it was more because in the UK at the time, I lived in Liverpool, where I was born, and the Docker strikes were happening. Thatcher was in power, and
Yeah,
all of that, and the country was
the
shifting.
Falkland Wars and stuff. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we had a film movement happening in Britain in the 50s and 60s with these really often very gritty, very stoic looks at poverty and the bottom line, and a lot of northern films about the difficulties in these industries. But then some very crazy dreamlike films as well. Lots within the movement, like The Loneliest of the Long Distant Runner or Jack Clayton's Room at the Top. Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf? I mean, there were so many films at that time that reflected the nature of the country, the heartbeat of the country. And that was really my political awakening. And because Thatcher conservatism was destroying my city
yeah,
at the time, and destroying a lot of other cities, coal miner strikes, dock strikes, all these different things. That's when I shift my mindset shift. I was becoming more and more creative and more inspired by literature and art and film, obviously, and games. You know that was second generation, third generation, sort of Super NES and stuff by that time. A few years before I went to uni, And yeah, I think it was liberalism and the notion of freedom and artistic freedom, along with equality and things like that, that drove my political awareness initially, and that really just came from Thatcherism.
Yeah.
But then we're all a product of our times to some extent, aren't we?
Oh,
So you know,
absolutely. Yeah.
that
Of course.
particular thing or the thing that surrounds your environment tends to shape those initial thoughts about that particular environment.
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I was like just like shaped like by the fact that yeah, my grandfather was a heavy labor guy. Like my mother is like the same, like very politically active, very politically engaged. Also very left, socialism oriented.
Mm.
Like pro labor, pro like the little like the minorities and the people who can't take care of themselves. That we need to take care of them and help give them a leg up
Mm.
in society. And that was always sort of what informed me was that we share this rock we live on together. We have to make the most out of it, and the best way of making the most out of it is to help each other. You fall down, I'll pick you up. I fall down, you'll pick me up.
Yeah, the
Like
way the
that.
world should work.
Yeah, like that. That mentality. You pay it forward.
Yeah, fairness and balance and looking out for one another.
Yeah, precisely. Which is, of course, in stark contrast with like much of the individualism that really sort of colored like the 80s and 90s.
Well, and now with social media and the obsession with Instagram and your your perceived person rather than the actual person,
Yeah,
the created identity, which is it's always a fallacy. People are always way different than they are on screen. But yeah,
yeah,
interesting.
but of course that also was the case in the past. It was just in different ways where maybe you were a different person at work than you were at
Yeah,
home, right?
you'd put on that facade.
Yeah, just in different circumstances.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because we all
Right. Well,
wear masks for different purposes.
yeah. I mean, work in particular. I think you have to put your airs and graces on. Usually, when I'm in a classroom, I'm very different to the way I am around you guys in chat on Discord, for instance. But
I would be remiss though, since I mean I'm Danish, so since we're talking about film mostly, and growing up in the '90s, if I didn't mention how deeply like film discussion here was colored by the dogma movement that occurred in like
right,
early mid '90s and was led by like filmmakers like Lars von Trier, Thomas Vinterberg, and so forth. Like when Thomas Vinterberg made The Party or Festen, which is basically like about I don't remember if it's like a birthday. I think it's the birthday of like a family patriarch, and then
I think it's the father or the mother or something. It's one of the main.
yeah, and basically at the party, like the kids start coming. One of the kids gets up and says, like I want to say thank you, Father, thank you for the invitation and so forth, and oh, thank you, Father, for molesting me when we were children, and and that sort of sets things off from there. Of course, the dogma movement was very sort of focused on realism. Like you had to have a
Yeah,
handheld camera. It had to be all natural light. You couldn't have any artificial lighting. It all had to be natural and stuff like that. And that was kind of there. There were a couple of interesting movies, a couple of not so interesting ones. Like I think, like or hate Lars von Trier, but his movies are interesting. Not that I've watched any of his last, I think, 5 movies, but they are interesting, certainly in concept, and they are not your mainstream fare. And I certainly appreciate him making movies still, just as I do with a lot of other like filmmakers outside of the mainstream, like Quentin Tarantino and stuff. Even though maybe I won't always enjoy his movies, but I like the fact that he's there making movies outside of the mainstream that are different and interesting.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love mainstream movies. I mean, we both love our indies and our Star Wars and
Yeah,
our Lord of the Rings and all these films, but they are packages that are presented to us by giant conglomerates who are there to make a lot of money. That doesn't mean they're bad movies.
No, they're just
Doors.
manufactured. Yeah.
Exactly, and some of them break a bit of a mold within that system, which is always great to see. Great genre filmmakers who would, or even Kubrick, who is basically exclusively tied to Warner Brothers and could do what he wanted, and that I really admire. I mean, one of the reasons we've done the last edit, we will cover occasional popular stuff, but one of the reasons we choose obscure films is because we like the Maverick. We
Yeah.
like we like an independent look at something which isn't tied to any the 18 boxes you must tick in a Disney film about the things you can't mention, that kind of thing.
Yeah. The happy surprise.
Yes, very, very much so. I mean, I remember watching La Haine with Vincent Cassel. I think that was A levels, and that was because it was about gang culture and violence,
Yeah.
and it was shot in black and white. It was very beautiful. And then I think it was a little bit. I think I was at uni. I came across Vincent Cassel again. I went to the video store for a bit on this pier. Like DVDs had just come out, but we had a load of videos and stuff. And a film called I'm forgetting the title now. It's called Dog something. He's a hitman in it, and it's bloody good. I'm gonna get his name wrong, but you'll know it. Takiro Kayaski, French actor. You're probably not going to click with it now. Doberman, that's the film. The film's called Doberman. It's about this hitman. It's shot really weirdly, and like even like Big Blue and stuff. Earlier films in French in particular, I tended to kind of gravitate towards. I think it was a lot of the camera movements and the color that was used.
Yeah.
And some of it was just really, really stunning to look at. And I'd only ever really seen that in American film up until I'd started studying these different movements. By the time I got to uni, I'd seen a really eclectic set of films by then, and I was already building on these things and going backwards. It's difficult now, I find. I mean, I'm such a horror guy. I really struggle to find independent, interesting horrors. There's more coming. Hereditary came out, and there's been the Babadook and things like that. But that's something I start to struggle with because I watch so much of it that the wheat is very difficult to separate from or easy to separate from the chaff because there's so much of the chaff,
Yeah.
which is a shame.
Paranormal Activity and stuff. Yeah.
Oh God,
Annabelle.
that's a little story for you that we can maybe start tying up with because we've been doing this for an hour and something. But one of my weirdest and funniest experiences watching a film was so Blair Witch came out in '99. Was it '98? I think it was '99. And I, at the time, was going to uni with. She was studying film as well. She was actually going out with one of my friends from school who'd come and done the same course. And she was the daughter of the person who marketed Blair Witch, which is like, whoa, that's mind blown a little bit.
Yeah.
But I remember going to the cinema with my girlfriend at the time, watching it, and everyone was like, "Oh my god, oh my god!" I just sat there like, "This is one of the tamest, badly shot horror films I've ever seen."
I remember. You remember that Robert Zemeckis made What Lies Beneath with
Yeah, Michelle
Harrison
Pfeiffer,
Ford and
Harrison
Michelle
Ford.
Pfeiffer. Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually had that. Someone brought a tape of that movie to our classroom in school, and we watched it. And I remember, like, especially all the girls were like, "No! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!" Like that whole thing throughout the movie, like, and screaming whenever the cue hit. Like, I was just sitting there. What are you doing? What are you doing?
It's not like a lot happens in that film either.
Yeah.
Half the film is spent looking through a fence. I mean, and Blair Witch to me was just some film students that got hold of a camera and decided it'd be really great to make a documentary about something that didn't exist.
Yeah, I loved Blair Witch though. I mean, Blair Witch is still my favorite horror movie of all time.
Interesting.
I mean,
we talked about it before, but
yeah, I mean, I did watch it at 3 a.m. also, so that also, but what really makes Blair Witch effective is how much it plays just in the imagination. I mean, that scene where they sleep and then they wake up and then they come outside and they find that someone's been through the camp at night and has just like put up these rock pile formations just around, and there's no clue why, for what purpose, who. That is unbelievably creepy and unbelievably unsettling. and I think the movie plays on that really, really, really effectively.
Have you ever seen a horror film
And the sense
called
of isolation.
The Last Broadcast?
I think maybe, yeah, it sounds
'Cause it-
familiar.
Well, it came out about 6 months or a year before Blair Witch, and it's exactly the same kind of thing: found footage, looking a horrific mystery, and this last broadcast. You should give that a watch when you get a moment, because that's it's interesting to see how popular Blair Witch was, and this had come out before it. And I personally prefer the last broadcast to Blair Witch. We should definitely do a podcast on Blair Witch in the future, because we're going to have very different opinions on that film, I think. So it'll be really interesting to pull it apart together.
Yeah.
Right, well, we covered a ton, and I think we should come back to this in maybe 6 months' time or a year or something, because there's a lot more we could talk about, our experience of the film and the things we've watched.
Basically just kind of rambled a little bit, but hopefully you got a little bit of a better sense of why we're tied to movies, how we've become informed about movies.
Exactly. Yeah.
I didn't mention, but I did go to university as well and studied film and media science. Like you, I just did not finish my bachelorette.
Right.
Because I had health issues and had to stop. But yeah, I was there like watching old Eisenstein movies and stuff that we had to go through, and old like Polish silent movies and stuff, that I don't remember anymore.
Battleship Potemkin and Shen Andalou and watching
and
the eye get sliced and stuff.
Yeah, Metropolis and all that stuff.
Metropolis, yeah. Great films. Well, yeah, so I think, we got sidetracked when we started talking about cinema, because then it was just like half an hour talking about cinemas.
Yeah.
But I love that, because all those experiences inform who you are as a viewer.
Yeah, no, I mean, they do. I mean, that is a huge part of film. Is for a lot of people anyway, is the communal experience of like experiencing with others. Like a comedy becomes 10 times better if you watch it with someone else and they laugh and you laugh together. Even then, that's when even terrible comedies can become good or decent comedies, right?
Because you laugh at them together.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Right, well, thank you very much for watching this special of The Last Edit. Yes, we rambled, but hey, you've certainly got a better sense of who we are, why we do the podcast, and kind of our view of film and how it's informed us as well. So if you've got any questions, chuck them in the comments. Ask us anything you like about film. If you want to talk about some of the films we've talked about, by all means. If you want to ask us questions about certain films or things we've experienced in film, go right ahead. That's what we're there for. That's what this podcast is
Absolutely.
for. And don't forget, you can now find us on Anchor, episode every 2 or 3 days until we catch up with YouTube. So if you just want to listen to us ramble on in audio form, by all means, go and find us on Spotify and iTunes and all those lovely places.
Thanks for listening or watching or however it is you enjoy the podcast.
Consume your media.
Yeah.
Right, take it easy, folks. We have been The Last Edit, and we shall see you next week.
Take care.